Hey guys, tonight we drift into shadowed medieval corners where death came slowly, wrapped in the chill of damp stone and the whisper of distant church bells. The fog rolls thick over rain-slick cobblestones, carrying the scent of wet earth and smoldering peat fires from huddled taverns. Candle flames flicker low in narrow windows, casting long shadows that dance like forgotten souls. This is the world of the most painful medieval deaths, not bursts of sudden violence, but lingering agonies stretched across hours or days, where the body betrayed itself inch by inch while the mind clung to prayers for mercy that rarely came. Imagine settling into your bed as we wander these paths. The air grows heavy with the tang of iron and smoke, the distant toll of a vesper bell marking the hour when executions often began. No rush here, no clamor, just the gentle unraveling of lives under the weight of sin, justice, and the unyielding hand of God as they saw it. They'll tell you these punishments cleansed the soul, prepared it for purgatory's fires, and perhaps, in their way, they believed it. Softly now, breathe deep, let the mist settle over you. If this calm drift into history's quieter horrors lulls you toward sleep, consider liking and subscribing. It helps our little channel wander these shadowed lanes more often. Drop a comment below. What's the hour where you are? Midnight in the misty moors? Dawn breaking over a quiet village? Share, and we'll feel connected in this timeless fog. Now, close your eyes. Let the first tale unfold, slow as the creep of frost on a dungeon wall. Rain fell in relentless sheets that evening in the town square of Nuremberg, 1487, turning the cobblestones to mirrors of grey sky. Torches sputtered in iron brackets, their flames hissing against the downpour, sending curls of steam rising like ghosts from the wet stones. The air hung thick with the smell of sodden wool from the crowd's cloaks, and the faint, acrid bite of unwashed bodies pressed close. Tavern doors stood ajar nearby, spilling the warm glow of hearth fires and the murmur of ale-soaked voices, debating the prisoner's fate. Breaking on the wheel was no hasty end, born from the need to punish those who defied the order of kings and church alike. Thieves, murderers, rebels, their crimes shattered society's fragile wheel, and so the state shattered them in turn. Chroniclers wrote of it as divine justice, a slow turning that mimicked the wheel of fortune itself, grinding the sinner beneath its spokes until the soul spun free. Wood was scarce and costly. They charged families for the spokes used, as if tallying purgatory's toll. Our victim was a nameless wheelwright from the outskirts, a man whose hands once shaped carts for merchants, but turned to pilfering grain. During a lean harvest, whispers said hunger drove him, but the bailiff's record noted only theft from the common well. Bound now in the square, his rough tunic clung wet to his frame, breath fogging in the chill air. The crowd gathered, bakers with loaves under arm, women with baskets of wilted herbs, children kicking puddles nearby, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the executioner's preparations. The wheel lay flat on a scaffold, its oak rim scarred from past uses, spokes gleaming dully under torchlight. Ropes creaked as they hoisted him onto it, wrists and ankles lashed to the wood. The executioner, hooded against the rain, hefted his iron bar, heavy, blunt, edged with the town's seal. First came the shattering of shins, the bar swinging slow, deliberate. Bone cracked with a sound like dry branches underfoot, muffled by the patter of rain. He gasped, eyes wide toward the overcast sky, murmuring Ave Marias that blended with the crowd's low prayers. Legs broken, then arms each blow measured to fracture without killing outright. The wheel turned then, spokes biting into splintered limbs as they bound him across it, body arched in agony. Rain traced rivulets down his face, mixing with sweat and tears. Hours passed, the crowd thinned, some drifting to taverns for mulled wine, their chatter turning to crops and tithes. His breaths came shallow, ragged, the iron bars echo fading into wind. By midnight, the wheel was raised vertical on a pole, spinning gently in the breeze, his form silhouetted against the moon's pale glow. Dawn brought ravens, their wings whispering as they perched on the spokes. The body hung their days more, a warning amid the market bustle, vendors hawking fish, the smell of fresh bread overpowering faint decay. Life flowed on, a cartwheel creaked past, unbroken. They believed this mended the world's wheel, one painful turn at a time, but down another shadowed path, where flames licked higher and smoke carried the scent of charred oak. Another fate awaited those deemed unfit for heaven's grace. Burning at the stake unfolded under a leaden sky in Paris, 1314. The air sharp with autumn frost, and the distant lowing of cattle driven to market. Church bells tolled vespers from Notre Dame, their bronze voices rolling through fog-shrouded streets, summoning gawkers to the El de la Sight. Wood smoke from nearby bakeries mingled with the heavier pall of pitch-soaked faggots. Stacked in the execution square, damp from morning dew, promising a slow burn. This punishment cleansed heresy, they said, fire mirroring hell's eternal blaze, purifying the soul before it faced judgment. The Inquisition's logic was ironclad, sin clung like pitch, and only flames could loose it. Records from the trials spoke of Templars and stubborn priests, their confessions extracted in dim chambers reeking of ink and fierce sweat. She was a healer from the countryside, accused of whispering spells over fevered children, herbs mistaken for witchcraft by a vengeful priest. No name survives in the rolls, just the woman of rhymes, relapsed sorceress. Clad in a shift of coarse linen, she stood barefoot on the platform, the cold wood biting her soles as chains rattled softly. The crowd pressed in, apprentices with calloused hands clutching bread crusts. Washerwomen gossiping of linens, a dog nosing scraps at their feet. Faggots piled high around a central stake, straw woven through for kindling. The executioner daubed her with sulphur and pitch, the sharp, biting scent stinging eyes even from afar. Torches approached, flames guttering in the wind, touching first the straw. Smoke rose thick, curling like incense from a thurible, acrid and choking. Coughs rippled through the throng as she gasped, arms straining against iron. The fire built slow, heat building like a fever, cloth charring with faint pops. Blisters wept on her skin, the smell of burning hair sharp amid the wood smoke. Prayers rose from her lips, faint over the crackle, paternosters blending with crowd murmurs. Flames climbed higher, wood hissing as sap boiled within, her form shrouded in yellow haze. Hours it took, some spectators departed for supper, pots clanging in nearby alleys. As embers cooled under starlight, the stake stood blackened, chains dangling empty. The crowd dispersed, bells tolling Compline. By morn, ashes were scattered in the Seine, the current carrying them swiftly away. Bakers fired ovens anew, the scent of loaves drowning memory. They charged for the wood, of course. Purification came at a price. As one flame died, another kindled in deeper shadows, where the earth's own grip claimed the condemned without mercy. Impalement waited in the misty dawn of Prague, 1421, fog blanketing the Charles Bridge like a shroud, the Vltava's waters lapping dark and cold below. Torchlight gleamed off wet armor of the guards, their breath clouding in the bite of early winter. The square smelled of river mud and horse dung, mixed with the faint, sour reek of fear from the chained figure. Kings and emperors wielded this for traitors and rebels, a stake driven slow to prolong suffering, echoing ancient decrees revived in medieval wrath. Chronicles described it as the traitors do, piercing the body as sin pierced the realm. Vlad of Wallachia favored it later, but here it served Bohemian justice against a Hussite spy. He was a tanner from the suburbs, skin stained forever from his trade, now plotting against the crown for bread and reform. Records named him Yannick, disloyal cur, dragged through streets slick with dew, his bare feet scraped cobbles raw. The crowd gathered loosely, fishermen mending nets, milkmaids with pails sloshing, children tossing stones into puddles. The stake rose tall, oiled oak smoothed by past horrors, point filed keen. Bound facing it, ropes bit into wrists. Hammers rang soft at first, driving the point through his garments with a muffled tear. Inch by inch, executioners rocked it upward, muscle and sinew parting slow. The wet suck of flesh yielding, blood welled warm, trickling in revutes down the wood, iron tang sharp in the mist. He hung there, breath shallow gasps, the stake shifting with each twitch. Rain began, pattering on his hood, diluting crimson streams to pink. Hours dragged, vendors cried hot chestnuts, steam rising fragrant. By noon, his head lolled, eyes glazing toward the fog-veiled castle. The body remained days, swaying in breeze, a perch for crows whose beaks clicked like dice. Life stirred on, barges poled the river, their oars creaking rhythmic. They left him as warning, the stake groaning softly through nights. But deeper still, in cauldrons of scalding fury, another agony bubbled forth. Boiling alive simmered in the steam-filled air of London, 1531, beside the Thames where fishmongers' stalls reeked of brine and gutted herring. A chill fog off the water clung to everything, beating on chainmail and dripping from overhanging eaves. Church bells pealed from St. Paul's, calling the pious even as the impious faced their end. Crafted for poisoners and counterfeiters, this mirrored their deceit, corrupting the body as they corrupted coin or cup. Henry VIII decreed it, believing hot water purged the venom from soul and flesh alike. Trial rolls detailed a cook accused of lacing stew with belladonna for a rival's inheritance. She was a scullery maid, hands rough from pots, eyes hollow from endless toil. Ellen the poisoner, the crier bellowed, shoved toward the great iron vat slung over coals. Chains clinked cold against her ankles. The crowd milled, apprentices gnawing pasties, the steam from their breath mingling with rising vapors from the brew. Water heated slow, bubbles rising with faint gurgles, the air thickening with mineral tang. Stripped to shift, she was lowered feet first by ropes creaking taut. Scalding gripped ankles first, skin reddening, then blistering with soft pops. Her cries muffled to moans as knees submerged, flesh sloughing in pale curls. Steam wreathed her face, eyes streaming, breaths labored through vapor. Hours passed, coals popped, water simmering to froth around her waist. Spectators bartered eels, the sizzle of their pans echoing the vat's hiss. By dusk, she floated limp, skin mottled like boiled cod. The vat cooled overnight, fat congealing on surface. Body hauled out at dawn, dumped in mud flats for tides to claim. Fishmongers worked on, knives flashing silver. They believed the boil washed sin away, steam carrying prayers heavenward. Down another shadowed path, where horses strained and blades flashed cold. Drawn and quartered stretched across a drizzly morn in York. 1404, the air heavy with the scent of tanneries and fresh-sawn execution block. Mist curled from the Ouse River, dampening banners limp on poles. Hooves clopped on cobbles as the cart bore the condemned, axles groaning under weight. Reserved for high treason against the crown, this quartered the body as it quartered the realm's peace, heart fed to dogs, limbs to city gates. Chronicles romanticized it as royal mercy, prolonging life to extract recantation. A plotter against Henry IV, a disgraced knight fallen to yeoman. Sir Rolf, once vassal, now traitor for allying with Welsh rebels. Dragged from dungeon reeking of mould, his beard matted, tunic stiff with grime. Crowd thickened, weavers with looms idle, boys betting coppers on the horse's pull. First hanged till half dead, rope fibers scratching neck, legs kicking faint. Cut down gasping, bowels spilled on block with wet rip, steam rising in chill air. Horses harnessed two limbs, whips cracking sharp, sinew tore slow, joints popping like knuckles. Quarters hacked free, blood pooling sticky, iron sent thick. Head struck off last, axe thudding dully, eyes staring blank. Parts boiled in cauldrons, tarred for spikes. Gates claimed them, ravens pecking through days. Market buzzed on, wool bales stacked high. As one quarter fell, starvation gnawed in deeper dark. Starvation in dungeons hollowed a wretch in the bowels of the Tower of London, 1377, where walls wept moisture, and rats scratched ceaseless in straw. Torchlight barely pierced the gloom, shadows pooling like ink. The air thick with mildew and unwashed despair, for nobles who offended king or pope. Slow wasting atoned without spectacle, body consuming itself as sin consumed virtue. Records whispered of Edward II's foes, left to fade in silence. A fallen steward, accused of embezzling alms, chained to wall, iron's cold biting wrists, bread and water dwindled to drips. Days blurred, hunger clawed belly first, then gnawed bones. Skin stretched taut over ribs, breaths rasping dry, droppings pattered soft, vermin nipping toes. Weeks passed unseen above, guards' boots echoed distant. Flesh melted away, eyes sunken deep. Heart faltered at last, body slumping still, dragged out months later, bones rattling. Buried in lime pit unmarked, above, tournaments rang with lances cracking. Peaceful now. Let that fade as plagues grip titans' necks. Plague deaths suffocated slow in Florence, 1348. amid streets choked with herb bonfires, their smoke-stinging eyes and throats. Bells tolled ceaseless from Santa Maria del Fiore, fog of incense veiling the dead cart's rumble. The Black Death punished sin en masse, buboes swelling as divine wrath, slow strangling by lymph and fever. Boccaccio chronicled it, rich and poor alike, gasping in shuttered rooms. A merchant's wife, swellings blackening groin and armpit. Fever burned gentle at first, skin hot to touch. Breath labored, chest heaving against invisible weight. Delirium whispered sins, family fled, leaving vinegar rags at door. Days of thirst, tongue swelling thick, buboes burst with wet pops, pus reeking foul. Suffocation came last, lungs drowning in own fluids, final rattle soft, body blackened, carted to mass pyre, flames roaring hungry. Life limped on, survivors bartering spices, voice is muffled through masks. Battlefield gangrene festered in the mud of Agincourt. 1415, rain turning fields to quagmire. The air rank with blood and trampled grass. Distant horns wailed. Smoke from powder lingering acrid. Wounds rotted slow post-clash. Gangrene God's judgment on warriors. Chronicles tallied French. Knights, legs amputated crude. Stumps festering. A pikeman, thigh gashed deep. Bandage soaked crimson, then yellow pus. Fever crept, flesh blackening line by line, sweet rotten stench rising. Maggots hatched, wriggling in meat. Delirium babbled of home, Sawbone's knife hacked late. Breath failed as poison reached heart, body twitching final. Left in ditches, crows feasting under moon. Armies marched on, banners sodden, scaphism. Rare whisper in medieval Persia-influenced courts. Milan 1492. Humid air buzzing flies around honey-smeared steaks. River mist carried lotus scent, faint under rot. Ancient rite revived for spies. Insects devouring slow in milk and honey bath. A Venetian agent betrayed. Naked, slathered honey and milk, bound between boats on canal. Sun-baked, insects swarmed, stings itching to agony. Milk soured, drawing more. Bites festered, fever boiling within. Days of screams fading to moans. Flesh stripped layer by layer. Left adrift, bones picked clean. Gondolas glided past serene. Buried alive sealed fates in Roman-influenced pits of Vienna, 1525. Earth damp and loamy, shuffles chunking rhythmic. Night air cool, our hoots echoing. For Vestal-like heretics or adulterers, earth crushed slow. Mirroring graves embrace, a nun accused false vows. Lowered into hole, coffin lid creaking shut. Soil thumped heavy, air thickening. Lungs straining, claustrophobia clawed. Screams muffled quick. Heart raced to burst. Body crushed over days. Gases bloating. Dug up later, twisted form warning. Farmers plowed fields above. The rack-stretched souls in the tower's dim chamber, 1554. Chains rattling like ghosts. Damp walls glistening. Candle drips plinked steady for extracting confessions. Bones popped slow under ropes. A Catholic plotter. Legs pulled taut first. Joints grinding. Sinews singing. Screams echoed stone. Hours turned days. Limbs elongated unnatural. Released broken. Death from shock slow. Body carted quiet. Drowning filled lungs in tidal Thames pits. 1450 London. Waves lapping cold iron cage. fog-muffled splashes. For witches, water proved purity, float guilty, sink saved. A midwife suspected, caged, lowered slow. Water rose chill to knees, waist, throat. Gulps panicked, chest burning fire. Final bubbles rose silent. Body fished out bloated, hung dripping. We'll continue this dark drift in the next part. The blood eagle carved its myth in the salt winds of York, 867, where Viking longships rocked gently in the Humber estuary, their prows carved like snarling wolves glistening with spray. Ravens wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the low moan of wind through thatched roofs. The air carried the tang of sea salt and drying fish from nearby flakes, mingled with the faint, coppery promise of blood yet to spill. Torch flames guttered in iron sconces along the timber scaffold, casting wavering shadows that played across faces etched by North Sea gales. This rite, whispered in Norse sagas and echoed in Anglo-Saxon chronicles, served as vengeance for slain Jarl's ribs spread like eagle wings, lungs plucked to the sky as an offering to Odin. Medieval kings adopted it sporadically against raiders, believing it freed the warrior's spirit in agony's embrace. A bridge between pagan fury and Christian dread. The skalds sang of it as the ultimate blood debt, lungs flapping pink in the breeze like Odin's ravens taking flight. Our victim was a Danish berserker captured after a skirmish near the walls, his beard braided with bone beads, tunic stiff with old sweat and brine. Named Harald in the runestones later carved, the oath breaker who slew the Reeve's son. Bound face down on the blood-crusted table, ropes of hemp biting into tattooed wrists, he spat defiance soft into the straw. The crowd gathered in the dim light, fishermen with nets coiled at feet, thralls clutching wooden bowls of barley stew, children peering from skirts, their small hands sticky with honeyed oat cakes. The executioner, a broad-shouldered Dane with arms like knotted oak, drew his sea, blade honed keen, reflecting torchlight in ripples. Incisions began at the spine, skin parting with a wet whisper, the iron scent blooming thick as flapjacks on a griddle. Muscle peeled back slow, careful not to sever the spine, each fiber resisting with faint pops. Ribs exposed, gleaming white amid red, were levered outward one by one, cracking like dry kindling in hearth fires. The wind caught his gasps, carrying them over the estuary, where gulls wheeled curious. Lungs drawn forth then, glistening sacs pulsing faint in the chill air, spread upon the splayed cage like pale wings. Breaths came in wet rasps, blood bubbling at lips, the metallic taste coating tongues of those who drew near. Hours lingered, the crowd shifted, sharing flasks of mead that steamed warm in cupped hands, murmurs turning to tales of past raids. By moonrise, his form stilled, ribs frozen in eagle pose, frost beating on exposed bone. Left overnight, wolves nosed close under starlight, their yellow eyes gleaming. Dawn brought the tide's hush, body tumbled into shallows, crabs scuttling over remnants. Fishermen launched boats, oars dipping rhythmic, nets heavy with cod. They believe the eagle carried his soul to Valhalla, wings beating eternal, but down another shadowed path. Where would an iron conspired in cruel geometry? The Judas cradle awaited its trembling weight. The Judas cradle perched in the torchlit gloom of Toledo's Inquisition cells, 1485, damp air heavy with the scent of mouldering stone and flickering tallow candles. Rain pattered soft on iron-barred slits high above, dripping in steady plinks that echoed like distant tears. Chains rattled faintly from adjoining chambers, a somber chorus underscoring the creak of ropes hoisting the pointed pyramid skyward, devised for heretics and relapsed Jews. This mirrored Judas's betrayal, the pointed seat-piercing flesh as sin pierced Christ. Inquisitors' logs detailed its use to extract names, the slow descent breaking with before body. They called it the Veiled Virgin, a mocking piety, believing pain honed the soul for confession's grace. He was a converso merchant, beard trimmed neat, accused of secretly baking unleavened bread for forbidden rites. Diego the hypocrite, scrawled in trial wax tablets, stripped to loincloth, wrists bound overhead, the ropes chafed raw as pulleys groaned. The crowd here was sparse, hooded inquisitors murmuring Latin, a notary scratching quill on parchment, the ink's sharp smell cutting the damp. No children played, only rats scurried in corners, noses twitching at fresh fierce sweat. Lowered slow onto the cradle's apex, greased oak point dimpling flesh first, anus or vulva targeted, depending on whim. Weight bore down inch by merciless inch, skin splitting with faint tears, blood welling warm and sticky down the wood. Muscles clenched futile, thighs quivering, breaths hissing through clenched teeth. Hours turned to vigil, candles guttered low, wax pooling hot on stone flags. He whispered names at last, voice cracking like parchment, the point grinding deeper with each sob. Released broken, dragged to cell reeking of straw and voidings. Death came days later from sepsis, fevered dreams of pointed thrones. Body burned unmarked, ashes to the Tagus. Inquisitors supped on olives and wine above, parchments filed neat. As one point pierced, another flayed the hide from living bone. Flaying unfolded in the sun-dappled square of Cordoba, 1560, olive groves whispering beyond walls, their scent earthy and green mingling with the dry dust of trampled earth. A hot sirocco wind stirred veils and cloaks, carrying pollen that tickled throats. Fountain water trickled nearby, mocking the thirst to come, reserved for traitors to faith or crown. Skin stripped as sin stripped grace, a naked soul hastened to judgment. Chronicles from Moorish times lingered into Christian hands, the knife's work purifying outward as fire did inward. She was a Moorish servant girl, eyes dark as dates, accused of poisoning her lady with henbane. Fatima the serpent proclaimed the crier, bound spread eagle to stakes, ropes fibers scratching wrists raw. The crowd clustered, fruit sellers with baskets of figs oozing sweet, beggars rattling bowls, a stray cat lapping at spills. The fencer's curved blade kissed collarbone first, skin loosening with deft slices, peeling back like parchment from a scroll. Inch by inch, layer by layer, the yellow fat gleamed beneath, nerves firing screams that echoed off whitewashed walls. Blood trickled warm, pooling in dust to mud. Salt rubbed into raw flesh then, crystals biting like fire ants, drawing shrieks to whimpers. Sun baked the exposed muscle through afternoon, fluids evaporating sticky, the air thick with copper and sweat. Spectators bartered melons, juice dripping red as her wounds. By vespers, skin draped like a banner nearby, body quivering faint. Left overnight, Dogs howled distant. Dawn claimed her with shock's chill. Tanned hide nailed to gates later, flapping in breeze. Markets bustled, olives pressed to oil. Deeper into shadowed vermin-haunted cells, rats gnawed their due. Rat torture festered in the straw-strewn dungeons of Bruges. 1432. Candle smoke curling thick, mingling with the rank musk of rodent nests and unemptied slop buckets. Water seeped through mortar cracks, pooling cold around ankle irons. Distant market bells tolled terse, muffled by stone thickness. For stubborn thieves or counterfeiters, rats devoured from within. Hunger turned on the sinner as gluttony turned on virtue. Guild records noted it as economical. No need for blades when vermin worked free. He was a fuller from the cloth halls, hands stained blue from woad, caught clipping guild marks. Peter the Clipper, strapped to bench belly up, greased cage of starved rats strapped over gut. The crowd intimate, jailer chewing bread rind, scribe yawning over ledgers, flames popping in brazier. Rats squealed frantic, claws scrabbling on iron, noses questing grease. First bites pierced skin tentative, then frenzied teeth gnashing through muscle. Hot blood welling as they burrowed. Intestines churned visible, writhing under assault. His moans bubbling wet. Hours dragged, rats gorged plump, bellies distending pink. Jailer prodded with stick. Laughter low, released raw, guts packed with straw. Infection bloomed feverish, died raving in straw. Body to pauper's bit, guilds wove on. Looms clacking steady, sawing in half-split souls in the rope-suspended hush of Edinburgh's toll booth yard, 1591. Mist rolling off the Firth of Forth, dampening ropes that creaked soft in breeze. Heather scent faint under tar from barrel stacks nearby. Executioners breath-fogged, hands chafed red. For murderers and witches, sawed asunder mid-air, halves falling to earth like divided kingdoms. Scottish assize rolls detailed the drop-through legs, prolonging to the last fibre. A cut purse named Tam, fingers nimble once, now bound ankles to crossbar, hoisted high, skirts falling modest. Crowd below, fishwives with creels, pipers tuning drones low. Saw teeth bit groin first, dulled blade rasping slow, bone grinding with each pull. Blood rained warm patters, soaking hoods. Muscles parted reluctant, entrails spilling coiled. Upper half gasped on, saw climbing ribs hour by hour. Halves thudded separate at dusk, innards steaming in chill. Crows feasted dawn, pipers played mournful. Tolls rang for market open, but as halves parted, crushing weights bore down anew. The rack and crushing ground bones in the vaulted chambers of the Chateau de Vincennes, 1380. Near Paris, where sane mists clung persistent, carrying the faint rot of river weeds. Braziers glowed dull red, heat waves shimmering off iron frames, sweat beading on stone arches. For those knights who dared to rebel or heretics, who just couldn't wrap their heads around doctrine, the rack was a nightmare come to life. Imagine your body stretching painfully, like a truth that's been twisted into a lie God's reproof echoing in the silence. Froissart wrote about this horror, chronicling the moans of the tortured in royal prisons. Picture a Burgundian lordling, his velvet doublet in tatters. Strapped down tight, let's call him Guillaume the Doubter. As the turnkeys cranked those ominous rollers, you could hear the ratchets clicking, like the countdown to doom. It started with joints. dislocating shoulders popping like corks, knees grinding down to nothing. Skin stretched so thin it was practically translucent, veins bulging a sickly blue. Hours of desperate pleas, Latin verses twisted in agony. When they finally released him, he was a limp, crooked shadow of himself. Then came the crushing imagine lying on a bed of peas, weights piled on your chest, each stone pressing down until your breath turned into wheezes, ribs cracked in sequence, lungs collapsing inward. He died with blue lips, his body left to hang on the gibbet. Meanwhile, above him, gardens bloomed, roses scenting the air with sweetness, a cruel contrast to the horror below. Let's not forget the drowning punishments for the unrepentant, like the ducking stools in medieval Norwich back in 1475. The Wensum River flowed dark and murky, willows drooping as if they were mourning. Rain slicked the planks, and the sound of torch resin popping in the wet air set the scene. For scolds and minor witches, those repeated dunkings were supposed to prove purity water as it twisted. Baptism. Town reeves kept meticulous records of fines and dunkings. Take Agnes the railer, a fishwife with a tongue sharper than her knife. Bound to a stool, she was lowered into the icy water, her lungs shocked by the first plunge. The involuntary gulps came next, her chest burning like fire. She surfaced gasping, weeds tangled in her hair, only to be dunked again until her lips turned blue. It was a brutal test of will either her spirit broke, or her body did. The crowd would disperse, heading to alehouses with foam-flecked mugs clinking. The horrors of the day drowned in drink. The plague's slow suffocation still lingered in the air. But let's dig deeper into that darkness. Picture Avignon in 1348. The papal palace casting long shadows. Fumigation herbs rosemary and juniper smoked in braziers, their pungent scent mingling with the tolling bells that seemed to call the dead. Bubonic fever swelled glands to bursting, a divine pestilence unleashed for the sins of usury. Imagine a papal clerk, his quill trembling in hand, with buboes the size of fists on his neck. It started with an itch, then agony pulsing through his body, skin burning hot like marble. Fevered dreams filled with demons haunted him, thirst cracking his lips. Those buboes would separate yellow, the stench like rotten cheese. Families fled, doors marked with red chalk, and the last of them were carted off to the plague pit, lying dusting their bodies quickly. As clerks continued to copy decrees, ink fresh on the page, the battlefield was no better. Gangrene crept insidiously after Poitiers in 1356, the French fields soaked in a wine-dark hue, the air thick with the smell of ferment and iron. Picture a crossbowman, a festering wound deep in his calf. Poultices failed him, a black line marching up his leg, the sweet rot of gangrene wafting through the air. Maggots cleaned the white bone, screams fading into delirium. Amputation came late, the saw rasping as it cut through flesh, the stump separating, his heart poisoned slowly, and the grave was shallow, a reminder of the price of war. Banners furled, and minstrels sang soft victories, but in the shadows, darkness loomed. We'll keep diving into this dark history in the next part, deeper into the fog-shrouded alleys of medieval torment, where shadows pooled like spilled ink on rain-washed flags. The rack's relentless pull echoed still in memory. But now, let us linger longer on crushing weights that bore down like the hand of divine judgment, grinding bone to dust in chambers where candle flames bowed low before the draught. Iron chains sighed heavy with the burden of sin. Their links cold and unyielding against flesh warmed only by the fever of fear. In the undercroft of Lincoln Castle 1322, during the harvest moon's pale glow filtering through arrow slits, the air hung thick with the scent of lime-washed stone and the faint acrid tang of urine. From overflowing piss-pots in the corner, rain drummed steady on the slate roof above, seeping through cracks to form rivulets that traced cold paths across the uneven floor. Braziers smoldered with damp peat, sending curls of blue smoke that stung eyes and clung to woolen cloaks like a beggar's plea. Crushing served those who crushed the meek oppressive bailiffs, tyrannous lords, or heretics who crushed faith under doubt. It mirrored the pea under the princess's mattress, but writ large, a bed of sharp stones or iron points beneath a weighted frame. Body compressed until ribs splintered like dry reeds, breath squeezed to whispers. Chroniclers like the monk of Evesham noted it cleansed avarice, the slow press expelling greed as blood seeped from pores. Families paid for the stones used, tallied like tithes to the poor box. Our victim was a corrupt reeve from the Lindsay marshes, hands once soft from counting rents now trembling in manacles. Godric the extortioner entered playing in the castle rolls after peasants rose with scythes against his yoke, dragged from a straw pallet reeking of mildew, his tunic patched and stiff with sweat, eyes darting to the flickering rushlights. The chamber held few witnesses, the constable nursing a horn of small ale, that frothed pale, at his lips astride dipping quill and inkhorn, with rhythmic scratches rats, nosing bold along the baseboards, their whiskers quivering at the scent of fresh despair. Strapped to the frame first, ropes of twisted hemp biting wrists and ankles, the wood groaning soft under his weight. Iron plate lowered necks, hinged and chained, its surface pocked with rivets filed to blunt spikes. Weights added deliberate. First a sack of sand, 40 pounds, settling with a muffled thud that pressed chest inward, breaths shortening to shallow sips. Sweat beaded cold on his brow, trickling salty into eyes already smarting from smoke. Second sack followed, ribs creaking audibly now, like timbers in a storm-tossed ship. He gasped pleas, mercy, Lord. The rents were but for the king's war, voice muffled as lungs compressed. Hours unfolded slow as complaint prayers. Third weight brought the first crack, a rib snapping with sound like a faggot in half flames, pain blooming white-hot through his core. Urine released warm down legs, pooling sticky beneath. The constable yawned, stirring embers to freshen the brazier, sparks dancing brief like fireflies. By midnight, 7 sacks bore down, spine bowing unnatural, eyes bulging bloodshot, lips blue-tinged. Final breaths wheezed like bellows starved of air, heart stuttering faint. The frame released with clank of chains, body collapsing limp, mottled purple, fluid settling in unnatural hollows. Left there through the night, rats ventured closer, teeth clicking on cold stone. Dawn guards hauled the remains to a lime pit behind the walls, shovels chunking earth rhythmic, the scent of quicklime sharp and cleansing. Above, villagers threshed wheat in barns, flails thudding steady, bread rising golden in ovens. They believed the crush restored balance. Stones were turned to walls for the realm's defense. As one body yielded to stone's embrace, waters rose cold and merciless along another path, where lungs filled not with air from God's breath, but the river's jealous claim. Drowning punishments deepened in the reed-fringed banks of the River Severn at Worcester, 1395. Autumn mists weaving thick tapestries that muffled the splash of oars, and the low of cattle on distant meadows. Willow branches trailed fingers in the current, their leaves rustling soft gold in the half-light of dawn. The air chilled skin through wool, carrying the earthy reek of mudflats exposed by low tide and the faint, fishy rot of snagged debris, crafted for petty sorcerers, scolding wives, or those who drowned infants in sin. This inverted baptism water-proving or disproving purity, body sinking as soul rose or floated condemned. Bailiffs' ledgers tallied dunkings as fines, believing submersion washed heresy away like silt from a ford. Trial rolls from the bishop's court detailed confessions bubbled forth between gulps. She was a midwife from the Droitwich saltworks, hands chapped from brine vats, accused of brewing abortifacients from Yarrow and Pennyroyal. Maud the child slayer, cried hoarse by the beadle, bound to the ducking stool, a rickety chair of oak lashed with leather thongs, her skirts heavy with damp as they rode her midstream. The crowd lined the banks loosely, salt boilers with pans steaming white, reed cutters sharpening sickles with whetstones hissing wet, children skipping stones that plipped faint across the surface. Lowered first time deliberate, waters chill as January iron gripping ankles. Rising to knees with insistent pressure, chair creaked taut. She thrashed instinctive, skirts billowing bubbles, lungs burning for air denied, surface coughing green river weed, gasping I recant, but verdict demanded thrice more. Second dunk longer, water invading nostrils sharp, chest heaving fire reborn with each desperate kick. Hair plastered, weed tangled, eyes streaming salt-mingled tears. By third, will broken or body yielding, lips purpled, breaths ragged wheezes, chest laboring against water's weight, pulled limp at last, stool dripping steady, hung from gibbet by towpath where willows whispered dirges. Tides lapped her feet through eve, bloating form under moon's silver gaze. By morn, cut down blue clod, buried shallow in unconsecrated ground, soil claggy with clay. Salt pans bubbled on, workers chanting rhythmic over flames. Deeper yet into vermin shadows, where rats claimed tribute unpaid. Rat torture burrowed further in the vaulted cellars of Ghent, 1467. During Lenten fasts, when the air grew ranker still with fasting guts and slop denied, candle tallow dripped plink by plink into iron pans. Shadows leaping wild across barrel-vaulted ceilings, slick with condensation. Chains dangled idle from rings, clinking faint in draughts that carried the musty whiff of cheese wheels stored above, and the sharper ammonia of rat piss pooled in corners, reserved for guild cheats and relapsed Jews. This let nature's scavengers enforce justice. Gluttony's punishment turned inward. Bowels devoured as avarice devoured the poor. Burgomaster rolls chronicled its thrift. No smith needed for irons when rodents gnawed free. They believed vermin were God's bailiffs, teeth ordained for sun's excision. He was a pewterer from the guild halls, fingers nimble at false asses, caught melting church plate for coin. Jan the alloyer scratched Hasty in vellum, strapped prone to a splintered bench, belly exposed pale under rushlight, a wire cage of woven reeds clumped over navel, packed with starved wharf rats whose eyes gleamed red in gloom. The watchers intimate, turnkey gnawing salt herring, bones crunching loud, a physician palpating pulses with cool fingers, flames popping applewood in the grate. Rats milled frantic at first, whiskers questing through bars, noses twitching at grease smeared fresh on skin. First incursion came with a squeal-piercing teeth sinking tentative into abdomen, parting epidermis with hot pinpricks that swelled to searing. Frenzy followed, claws scrabbled frantic, bodies burrowing pink noses first into yielding muscle. The wet tear audible over his mounting moans. Intestines shifted visible under skin stretched taut, rats tunneling deeper, tails flicking exposed like pink whips. Sweat poured cold rivulets, mixing blood to pink slurry seeping round cage edges. Hours ground on, rats gorged to plump torpor, bellies ballooning furred, only to be replaced by fresh hunger-maddened kin. Pleas bubbled to delirium. The guild mark was but worn thin. By use, voice cracking parchment dry. Turnkey prodded the mass with ash-shod poker, stirring shrieks anew. Laughter rumbling low like distant thunder. Released at Lord's bell, guts ravaged to hanging ropes slick and steaming. Packed Hasty with oakum reeking tar. Fever bloomed swift, pus yellowing straw, breath rattling phlegm thick. Died raving of tiny demons by vespers' necks, body to the shelt at flood, carp nosing remnants. Guild bells tolled for a size, hammers ringing pewter pure. Sawing in half prolonged the divide in the wine-whipped courtyard of Stirling Castle. 1488, Highland gales moaning through crenellations, carrying the sharp resin of pine torches and the peaty smoke of dying watchfires. Dawn broke grudging, mist veiling the fourth's silver thread below, cobblestones slick with dew that beaded like sweat on bound limbs. For regicides and witches who cleaved communities, this bisected body and soul mid-air has tumbling asunder like a realm rent by treason. Scottish justiciars' protocols mandated the saw through tenderest parts, prolonging to extract final curses or confessions. They saw it as Solomon's wisdom inverted, blade dividing the irredeemable. He was a border river named Black Dougal, hands calloused from lance and reins, caught plotting against James the Third's peace, hoisted by ankles to a stout gibbet beam, skirts of his braes falling modest over groin, ropes creaking taut in gusts, the throng below hardy, crofters with spades propped, women with milk pails frothing fresh, pipers droning low mournful strains on Duquesne reeds. Sawyers approached with a two-handled ripsaw, teeth filed coarse for flesh not timber, oil slick to ease the bite. First stroke rasped groin ward, fibers parting reluctant with gritty drags. Blood welling warm to patter rhythmic on stones below. Crowd shifted cloaks against spray, sharing oatcakes crumbly and warm. Sinews yielded reluctant, pop by pop like harp strings plucked awry. Entrails uncoiling slick coils to dangle steaming in chill. Upper torso lived on, saw climbing ribs hour upon hour, lungs heaving exposed. Breaths frothing pink foam, eyes locked heavenward, murmuring Gaelic pleas lost to wind. Halves thudded separate at noon's weak sun, innards steaming brief before frost-rimed edges. Crows gathered wheeling, beaks clicking anticipatory, halves gibbeted opposite gates. Swaying dual warnings, pipers struck up lively for the laird's hunt, horns winding faint over bra. But his sought teeth stilled, impalements stake pierced sharper still. Let's circle back to that Vladdy grim embrace with fuller measure. Impalement lingered long in the birch groves skirting Buda, 1462, under a sky bruised purple with coming snow. Winds sighing through naked branches like widows' laments. Torch knots of pine resin crackled merry. Sap bubbling fragrant amid the loamy earth smell and sharper anticipation of ironwood. River Danube murmured distant, ice flows clunking soft. Hungarian kings revived it for Ottoman spies, and brigands, stake oiled smooth to slide slow, prolonging as sin prolonged damnation. Matthias Corvinus scribes tallied it merciful to burning, body pierced as heart pierced Christ. Believed the upright pose mocked the impious, soul ascending impaled. A Turkish scout named Mehmed, lithe from saddle life, captured with maps inked fresh, bound kneeling to the stake's base, a pyramid of oak tapered keen, hammered initial through buttocks with mallet thuds muffled by snow-damp ground. Inch by rocking inch upward, peritoneum parting with wet sucks, organs shifting reluctant round wood's girth. Blood cascaded warm trunkling down grain, steaming faint in frost air. Hung quivering hours, bowels evacuating involuntary, reek mingling pine. Crowd dispersed to this mugs foaming, tales of border raids. Days later, ravens perched, beaks prying eyes first. Stakes lined roadsides, forests whispering over agonies past. Flaying's knife whispered keener in the cedar-scented halls of Constantinople's shadow under Latin rule. 1206, Fourth Crusade's wake, air heavy with incense from Hagia Sophia, and the salt brine of the Bosphorus lapping quays. Sun slanted golden through lattice screens, dust motes dancing lazy. Byzantine holdovers for blasphemers, skin flayed as falsehoods flayed truth, hide cured for drumheads of warning. Nicotus Choniates mourned its revival, knife purifying flesh for soul's ascent. A Greek scholar doubting icons, Nikephoros the iconoclast, stretched on frame amid mosaics faded, hooks through limbs tugging taut. Freya's lunated blade traced shoulders first, epidermis lifting like vellum, fat yellow gleaming beneath. Layer by layer to periosteum, nerves screaming orchestral, blood sheeting warm to floor rushes soaking crimson. Salt brine dashed then, crystals fizzing agony renewed. Sun asked slow, spectators monks chanting psalms monotone. Skin hole draped rackside, body rock quaking. Dogs howled night through, dawn shock claimed. Hide to gates, flapping banner-like. Icons wept resin tears. Burning's flames kindled slower in the hazel copses of Rouen. 1431, Joan of Arc's pyre famed. But others quieter, missed off sane carrying apple wood smoke sweet at first. Faggots damp from morn dew, hissing reluctant. For relapsed, Templars, Lollards, fire-scoured inward sins. Inquisitors deemed slow burn pious. Soul singed clean, a weaver preaching predestination. Thomas the fatalist, shift smeared pitch-biting nostrils. Stake chains clinking cold, straw-lit first, smoke coiling incense-like, eyes watering. Heat built feverish, blisters weeping clear, then serum, hair crisping acrid. Flames lapped deliberate, with sap popping berries within. Prayers faint over crackle, crowd picnicked cheese rind sharp. Charred upright days, rain washing ash grey. Markets vended relics false, bells pealing trade. Wheel spokes turned truer in Brussels' Grand Place, 1523. Carillon chiming soft, air crisp with waffle irons hissing batter, and faint char from prior turns. For murderers of children, limbs shattered wheel ward, mimicking spokes of fate. A baker poisoning rivals yeast, haunts the sour. Bar swung measured, femurs splintering like baguette crust. Gasps fogging cobbles. Bound radial, raised swaying, ravens wheeling. Market flowed pies steaming around. Boiled deeper in Antwerp's shell-side vats. 1540s. Fish oil tang mingling bubble gurgles. For forgers, leaden death molten soul. A coiner clipping gross, vat froth scalding peels. Hours afloat mottled, tides claimed. Drawn ropes strained touter in Coventry's bullring. 1457, alehouse hops scenting blood iron. Treason's quarter, hang, eviscerate steam hot. Horses tear quadrant. Night rebel disemboweled gurgling, quarters gate spiked. Starved hollower in Edinburgh's Canongate vaults, 1530s. Kelp smoke drifting sea salt. Embezzler dwindled shadow. Bones rattling chain. Plague choked tighter in Venice's plague isle, 1576. Gondolas creaking black-veiled. Gondolier bulboed purple. Lungs gurgling canal mud. Gangrene marched slower post-tours, 732. Lawyer Banks wine ferment rot sweet. Frankish footman leg blackened. Sawdust amputation late. Scaphism honeyed lazier in Genoa's Riviera coves, 1402. Figs bursting sunripe. Spy boat bound. Wasps droning stings to gangrene sweet. Buried earthier in Bossel's lime kilns, 1476. Chalk dust throat dry, adulteress carfined soil thumped. Crush panic heartburst. Blood eagle winged wider in Dublin's thing mount, 1014. Peat bog reek copper tang. Irish chieftain ribs splayed. Lungs breeze flapped. Judas pierced pointier in Nuremberg's torture attic, 1498. Laugh and plaster creak. Heretic descended apex abraded. Sepsis whisper. Flay salt stung fiercer in Palermo's citrus groves, 1280 to Sicilian Vespers Eve. Lemon oil cutting blood. Rebel skinned citrus zested agony. Radborough's tunneled truer in Lisbon's Tagus damp, 1497. Sardine oil luring. Thief guts vermin plump. Saw grown slower in York's Micklegate, 1460. Rose wars mist blood petaled. Traitor halved mid gasp. Rack elongated area in Carcassonne's Viscount cells, 1229. Albigensian wake. Lavender faint under sweat. Kafir stretched socket pop. Drownings dunked deeper in Amsterdam's IJsselmeer shallows, 1510. Eel silt choking. Scold wheat-haired, blue-lipped. Wheel rotated remorseless in Lisbon's Terreiro do Paco. 1755 quake precursor irony. Spice ships creaking. Highwaymention's iron barred. Burn pired. Patient in Edinburgh's Castle Hill, 1591. North Sea wind famming slow, which charred peat fragrant. Impalements staked steadfast in crocos. Wall shadow, 1490s. Vistula ice cracking ominous. Peasant rebel wood gutted sway. Boil bubbled blunder in York's Fossgate, 1542. tannery urine sharpening steam. Counterfeiter flesh curl float. Quarter pulled persistent in Bristol's Wine Street. 1497 Perkin Warbeck Echo. Cider vats ferment beside. Usurper limb torn heart hock. Starve wasted wearier in Oxford's Bocado. 1350s. Bodleian dust motes witness. Scholar embezzler rib shadow. Plague festered filthier in Prague's Jewish quarter. 1382. Ghetto smells onion garlic pus. Rabbi boober necked rattle. Gangrene gangled gloomier post Creasy. 1346. Poppy fields trampled rot sweet. Archer stump maggot heart poison. Scaphism swarmed stickier in Ragusa's Adriatic caves. 1453. Olive press oil honey mix. Agent insect devoured bone glean. Buried blanketed bulkier in York's All Saints pit. 1520. Churchyard yew berries poison black. Nun soil crushed gas bloat. Blood eagled eternal in. Orkney's stromness. 1263. Salt cod drying wine whipped. Norse raider lung winged. Judas cradled cruller in Venice's Piombi leads. 1600. Canal mist dripping apex. Spy point perforate sepsis. Flay-fleshed finer in Toledo's Alcazar cells. 1481. Moorish tile cool under blood. Converso hide banner gate flap. Rat-ravaged rancor in Florence's Bargello. 1490 for Savonarola 4. Leather tannery reek kin. Usurer burrow pink belly plump. Saw severed sombra in Lincoln's Minster Yard. 1536 pilgrimage grace. Hymn echoes blade rasp. Rebel groin bisect entrail coil. Rack ratcheted remoter in Enger's Meleze dungeon. 1370s. Lawyer fog moss damp. Huguenot precursor elongated vein blue. Drowned deluged drearier in Hull's Humber tides. 1470s. Herring gull cries bubble burst. Brewster dunkweed gasp. And so the wheel of agony turns ever. Onward. Each spoke a tale etched in forgotten chronicles. We'll continue this dark drift in the next part. Dawn mists carried the toll of morning bells through the crooked lanes of Bruges. Muffled and strange as if underwater, the city slept lightly, its rooftops glistening with dew, its canals exhaling the smell of fish, salt, and damp brick. Somewhere, a baker's paddle struck an oven door, hollow and rhythmic, mixing with the distant caw of rooks perched on chimney tops. Beneath this calm surface, the darker habits of the age still stirred, not yet buried, merely watching from the cellar shadows. The stories go on. Pain was a teacher, and the medieval mind believed in its lessons absolutely. Whatever the sin, thievery, heresy, or doubt, there was a method to peel it away. One muscle fiber at a time, until only purity remained, or silence. Tonight, we drift again beyond the candle's circle, toward torments designed in stone, quenched by prayer and forgotten by the dawn. The damp wind of Paris, 1255, wound through the cloisters of the Sainte-Chapelle, stirring tapestries that smelled faintly of wax and mildew. A row of monks filed from matins, their sandals whispering over flagstones slick with condensation. Out beyond the convent wall, the square by the grand chatelet waited, quiet except for the snap of ropes under tension. The rack waited too, wood dark with use, pulleys oiled like a ship's rigging, its shadow reaching long across the cobbles. Tonight's penitent was no warrior or thief but a scholar, Etienne the Doubter. The scribes called him a teacher accused of translating forbidden texts from Greek into the common French tongue. Words were heavier than gold then, and more dangerous to own. When they laid him down under the ropes, Etienne crossed himself with shaking fingers. The executioner, a thick man in patched leathers, nodded once toward the presiding monk, who muttered a few lines of Latin and stepped back. The first turn of the wheel came with a creak like something waking from a long dream. Arms pulled taut, the tendons in his elbows sang. One more, and his shoulders cracked apart with the dull rip of cloth splitting. Breath hissed through clenched teeth. Minutes stretched like lifetimes. The rain tapped the scaffold's roof, steady as a heartbeat. In the audience, an apprentice wiped his nose on his sleeve and watched quietly. Etienne managed one calm breath between spasms and whispered something small. The opening line of a prayer, or perhaps a new sentence never to be finished. By dawn, they found him slack and pale, limbs elongated by half their natural length. The scribe wrote Confessus Estate per instrumentum. The monks went to breakfast. Outside, the river flowed on, indifferent and brown as always. Pigeons returned to their favorite ledge on the chapel tower, cooing over scraps of bread. Across the Alps, in Siena, 1320, heat shimmered between stone cloisters that reeked of jasmine and dung. Flies buzzed around the market stalls, settling on figs split open to reveal their sweet flesh. Beneath this living marketplace of color, in the civic dungeons below the Palazzo Pubblico, there was scarcely air between the walls, only the smell of sweat, lime, and death's distant patience. They called it the box here, a coffin-sized space built of timber slats. The condemned was sealed inside, a pride if preferred, and forgotten. No torture of blade or flame followed, just time dripping onto stone like water in a cave. Brother Anselm, a clerk who had questioned the relic trade too openly, had spent 7 days there before the guards remembered to check the lock. They said he had prayed until the last daylight had gone, his voice barely audible through the cracks. On the 8th morning, they found him collapsed in the stale dark air, his face calm as an icon's. Rumor said the city council burned the box itself, claiming that it had absorbed too much sin. Only the torches and the rats saw that night's soft fire dance along pine planks, sparks vanishing into the same wind that turned the millstones by the Arbia River. Far to the north, the Baltic snows whitened the ramparts of Visby in 1381. The air there was so still that the sound of an axe fell like a bell through ice. A condemned pirate named Ludwig Hamar stood chained against a frozen wall, his breath pluming like smoke. He had stolen from the Hanseatic trade floatiers barrels of salted eels, bolts of Danish silk, and worse, killed a priest in the taking. Too severe for ordinary hanging, too small for royal spectacle. The magistrate ordered an improvised punishment, the crushing press. Stones were stacked on his chest in slow rhythm, each a silent heartbeat. At 1, he prayed. At 2, he cursed. By the 12th, his voice was gone. The air was clear enough to hear the crack of his sternum, carried faint on the wind towards the frozen harbor. When the seagulls came at dawn, they perched along the parapet and waited for the warmth to return. The masons later used those same stones to repair Visby's western gate. They said the joints never shifted again. Down in Lombardy, where poplars swayed over the slow green Ticino, 1419, a punishment older than parchment still lingered in whispered tales, scaphism. Perhaps only once was it done in those valleys, to a mercenary branded traitor to Duke Filippo's cause. Yet the record lies there, in the Duke's ledgers: honey, milk, 6 jars, nothing more. The rest, the air remembers. Bound between hollowed logs, the soldier was left afloat in a shaded canal. Bees murmured around his opened wounds. Wasps found him before the second day was done. The river narrowed and stilled, thick with reeds, and the hum of insects melted into the slow pulse of summer heat. When the guards returned after a week, only his boots remained, wed in drifted pollen and faint ripples. Nearby frogs sang on, untroubled. They burned sage along the banks after, to sweeten the water before the next harvest. A century later, under the same silent theory that pain could prey, witch trials unspooled across Switzerland's high valleys. Here in Lucerne, 1512, snow tired of falling gathered in heaps along the town square. The pyre was already soaked through, but burned slowly, stubbornly. The air smelled of wet wood, wool smoke, and the crisp edge of mountain wind. She was called Leidnachtfrau in the parish rolls, a woman who kept bees, who spoke to them in the deep of winter, so they would not die from loneliness. Someone said she made them obey her like familiars. Someone else said her eyes glowed green when lightning crossed the lake. It was enough. They bound her to a post near the water trough to keep the flames from spreading to the roofs. When the torch touched the kindling, the fire smothered itself at first, to wet to burn. Then came a hiss, and a sigh, and a thin smoke that rose like mist from morning fields. The townspeople watched in heavy silence as the smoke thickened, carrying with it the faint sweetness of pitch. Before noon, snow began again. The witnesses went home, cheeks blotched red, and the square emptied of all but apology. That night, her beehives hummed restlessly in the cold. If one walked south again, down to the Spanish coast, toward Cadiz, the centuries thinned. Chains rusted. Flames mellowed to wax wicks in cathedral naves. And yet the instinct, this desire to punish through endurance remained, softened into ceremony, but alive. In 1584, an inquisitor's prisoner was lowered to a dungeon below the sea wall. The waves struck with dull rhythm against the outer wall, foam seeping through the cracks. Inside, rollers turned, tightening a rope by the slow twist of water-driven gears. It was a rack moved by tide alone. The prisoner, a silversmith's son accused of casting forbidden charms into lockets, was stretched infinitesimally each time the tide swelled. For 3 days, the rhythm of his pain matched the rhythm of the sea. At low ebb, he prayed. At high, he screamed. By the 5th sunrise, he was gone, the rope slack, the machinery still creaking as the tide receded. The inquisitors recorded the confession neatly in their book. He admitted to the sea, so the centuries turned, from wheel to flame to rope and tide, until even the torturers were forgotten, their instruments relegated to museums or myths. But the stones remain, holding warmth from fires and chill from iron both. Each cobblestone underfoot in an old city knows something. Each bell tower that tolls the hour has heard those same sighs rise and fall with the fog. And now, as you lie there in lamplight or dark, as the quiet hum of electricity replaces the murmur of medieval river towns, perhaps you hear a faint echo in the distance, the draw of wheel spokes, the flutter of banners, the low murmur of prayer mingling with pain. But it's long past the hour when such things matter. The night settles around you like a cloak, heavy but kind. Tomorrow will be brighter. The mists will lace through time again, as they always do, and history will sigh back into its cobblestones. Rest now. You've walked far through shadow tonight. Sleep comes, soft and slow. We'll continue this dark drift in the next part. Night again. The hour when the last embers in the hearth sigh red beneath their own ashes, and the hall's great timbers groan softly as if dreaming. Beyond the shuttered windows, mist creeps along the lanes, dulling the lantern light until it seems to float, detached from the walls, a faint shimmer over cobblestones damp from evening rain. Tonight our path winds east, through fog-thick forests, up spiral castle stairs slick with moss, to the echoing chambers where justice and trembled between mercy and cruelty. Each story now a whisper from the corners of the Middle Ages, the echo of footsteps, the low drone of prayer, the metallic taste of waiting, the crushing of Willem of Haarlem, 1468 in the lowlands of Holland, winter hung wet in the air. The canals half-crusted with uneven ice that crackled when the barges pushed through. Around Haarlem's market square, torches fluttered uncertainly, smoke drifted, carrying the scent of peat, fried herring, and wool. The townsfolk gathered in muffled clusters, cloaks drawn tight, breath blooming like pale ghosts. The wooden frame stood ready near the scaffold, to planks, iron hinges, stone weights. They called it the Dutch press, a cousin to England's pin forte et dure. For traitors and hoarders, the reasoning was quaint. The earth itself was invited to reclaim what greed had stolen. Willem, a grain factor accused of withholding wheat through the famine, was dragged forward barefoot, his ankles blue from cold. The clerk read the charges while a boy handed the executioner the first flat stone. Willem's eyes found the sky, a dull pewter dome. 1 stone for deceit, the clerk murmured, and it descended. The board creaked, his breath shortened. Another for the starving children. The second thudded home, a sigh slipping from between clenched teeth. The third came slower. Minutes stretched, marked by the drip of meltwater from the gallows beam. His ribs groaned, bending inward with each weight. A feathered hush swept the crowd. Only the clergyman spoke. Dominus vobiscum. The last stone broke him, quietly. The clerk closed his ledger with a snap, as if sealing winter inside it. The torches lowered. Behind them, the baker's ovens smoked for morning loaves. Life turned its page. The drowning at St. Malo, 1349 sea mist hung thick as candle wax over the Breton coast. You could smell the tide long before you saw the waves, salt, rot, and fish scales glittering faintly in lantern glow. On the docks, sailors from a Genos cog whispered about the plague ships farther south. Fear in that year was a living animal. It crouched in every throat, each cough a confession. The city's bailiff had tethered a small skiff offshore, its rope creaking against the posts. Bound inside, a man knelt, hands and feet tied, a fisher accused of using devil winds to sink a rival S-nets. The punishment was simple. If water rejected him, he was guilty if it held him down. Innocent but drowned. They pushed the skiff away with a long pole. The man tilted sideways just as the first gull cried, a harsh note against the slow grind of the tide. The sea closed above his head silently, perfectly still for one heartbeat. When the bubbles broke, the crowd stepped back without a word. The priest marked a small cross in the air and drifted away toward the church, where bells soon tolled vespers. By the time the tide carried the skiff back against the pier, St. Malo's lanterns were already dimming, the smell of storm in the wind to come. The Rack of Toulouse, 1231, the old fortress of Toulouse, stood high over the Garonne, its stones blackened by torch soot, its cellars damp as crypts. Down there, the walls whispered with the voices of the dead. Heretics, they called them. The very word tasted of fear. Cathars, the pure ones, who loved to cleanly for the church's liking. In a chamber lit by 3 narrow lamps, a confessor murmured ad majorem Dei gloriam and gave a nod. The ratchet clicked, the ropes whined. The accused, a weaver named Arnaud, clenched the prayer bead that someone, perhaps his daughter, had hidden in his sleeve. Dry sinews stretched like bowstrings. His body refused to break outright. It elongated instead, inch by trembling inch. Between each scream came the creak of the wood, steady as a metronome. When it ended, the inquisitor recorded. He abjured in full, his speech sincere, a shorthand mercy, perhaps. Somewhere above, the cathedral bells rang the hour. The sun climbed. The market opened on time. The burials at Vienna, 1528, they said the city smelled of iron that year. Plague stalked the alleys like something visible, a blue fog that clung to door frames. The undertakers worked day and night, faces hidden in wax cloth masks shaped like birds. Burial was mercy's business, but not all who went to ground were yet dead. The hospitals overflowed. The weak were sent to rest, laid in pine coffins, nailed quick. Scholars called it premature interment. The gravediggers called it peace. But one chronicler, a monk named Gebhardt, wrote of a sound that haunted him for years. A dull, rhythmic thump beneath the soil of the long cemetery. He said the bells had rung through evening mist. The mourners dispersed, yet long after, as the candles guttered out, he heard it again from the earth itself, fists, and then silence. He never walked that way again. Today, near Stephansdom, the street still dips a little there. The locals say the ground settles oddly after rain. The boilings of Lubeck, 1539, the port streets reeked of tar, seaweed, and fish oil thick enough to taste. From the harbour towers, the steeples of St. Mary's peered down austere, as if measuring every hush. On an early Sunday morning, before the first bells, a crowd shuffled toward the customs wharf, faces wrapped against the cold. They had come to see justice boiled alive. The crime, poisoning the admiral's wine cellar. The accused, a kitchen boy of 15, wide-eyed and barefoot. Justice, they said, must work with heat when treachery works with craft. The cauldron bubbled black, torches reflecting in its surface like a trembling moon. Steam clung to cloaks. A smell of warming iron filled the air. When lowered in, he gasped once, a sound like rain on leaves, and was gone beneath. No one spoke after. The harbor gulls circled, white flecks against the dawn-pink sky. By the time the market opened, the cauldron was emptied, the kettle washed, and the quayside swept clean as if nothing had happened. The butcher began chopping meat at the usual hour. The sawing of Prague, 1471. It was twilight when they brought him from the cells, a thief of relics, caught raiding a saint's shrine. Overhead, the great clock ticked in slow breath. The executioners worked methodically, like carpenters on a winter day. A rope hung between two beams. They hoisted him, head down, legs parted. The saw began its long descent, rasping through the soft groin first, its rhythm steady, accompanied by the mutter of the crowd. The sawyers aimed for perfection, even, slow strokes, so the condemned lived to see the blade crest his ribs. When it was done, they doused the saw in river water and hung it dry beside the city gate. Rain that night washed the square clean. The wind blew. Candles burned through until morning matins. The flaying of the false abbot, Canterbury, 1355 English spring. The smell of earth waking, damp weeds, and rain striking slate in perfect rhythm. The cathedral bells tolled prime. Pilgrims shuffled through the nave with their candles and whispered blessings at Becket's shrine. Behind the altar, in a smaller courtyard, another ritual unfolded. An abbot accused of coin forgery, a craftsman of lies. For him, they reserved the knife, stripped to the waist, bound against a post slick with old water stains. He faced the stone wall and began to recite psalm verses. The blade entered above his shoulder, trained and neat, lifting the first thin sheet of skin as if uncorking a secret. Each peel left behind red gloss, the color of sealing wax. When done, they hung the skin across the cloister rail until evening, when the rain returned and washed it away. Only the psalm lingered, Domini, refugium factis eis nobis. The silence in Ravenna, 1480 in Ravenna's old cisterns, where frogs croaked through endless echoes, and torchlight shimmered gold on wet walls. A rumor took root, that of the room of water, a narrow cell built within the sewer vaults, where water would rise, inch by inch, until the prisoner learned to confess or to drown. No record remains of names, only whispers. Some say it was used once for a monk who denied papal infallibility. Others say for a thief who stole relic bones. Whoever it was, they found a scrap of cloth wedged between two bricks years later, still faintly marked with blue ink. The last word reads simply fiat. The water had left no trace of bone, only damp breath in the air, long after torches were gone. And so the centuries unspooled, one pain evolving into another, each wrapped honey-sweet in the cloth of moral duty. Kings crowned cruelty as faith, priests baptized agony as order. Yet even in those closed rooms where iron sang and rope groaned, there were always quiet witnesses, the torches, the rats, the moths that brushed their wings against the flames. They saw both torment and tenderness, for, strange as it sounds, some of those condemned died holding to final grace, whispering forgiveness for the hand that held the blade. As the mist climbs the window now, the hour has turned. The rain softens its drum over pitched roofs. The crows have ceased their calling. The streets of history dim, one cobble at a time, until only the echo of boots remains. This night of punishment wanes toward quiet. Draw your blanket a little closer. Listen to the hush between words. It is older than cruelty, gentler than time. The fire has burned low, but its warmth lingers. Sleep well, traveler of shadows. The worst of the old agonies are long done. The world outside hums peacefully again. We'll continue this dark drift in the next part. The rain has long stopped. The ground gleams, reflecting the torchlight that trembles in the distance, each drop clinging to cobblestones as if afraid to fall again. Church bells echo from somewhere unseen, their tone heavy, hollow, ancient. The hour slides past midnight. The air is that peculiar kind of still that belongs to the dead of night and the end of days. Tonight, we step into the last of the stories, the darkest yet most human of all, where pain and peace blur, and the world, for once, seems to pause in pity. A whisper rises from the misty valleys of Saxony in the year 1453. It begins in a forest clearing, dew beating on leaves, smoke curling up from damp firewood, where a stake stands alone. It was once for burning heretics, but today it holds only air, rain, and memory. The last execution here had been to summers past. A young monk accused of conversing with angels unapproved by the church. They burned him at dawn, when mist still ribboned between the pines and birds did not yet sing. He had refused to scream. When it was done, peasants came quietly to gather the ashes, mixing them into the soil for their barley crop. He spoke to angels, an old woman said, planting her seed. Perhaps they'll answer him now, and maybe they did. For in the harvest that followed, witnesses swore the grain grew tall, gold as flame. Bread baked from it tasted faintly of honey, though no one had added any. Far north, in icy Norway, 1490, the aurora flickered faint green, silent fire across a sky of ink. Beneath it, in the fishing village of Tromsø, a woman sat chained to a post driven into the frozen sand. She was accused of calling storms to wreck ships. The villagers feared her, yet pitied her. She had lost her husband to the sea the year before and never stopped singing to the waves. That night, the tide crept in silently. The water touched her bare feet, then her knees, then her chest. She sang still, though her voice trembled with cold. The aurora shimmered overhead like a slow prayer. When morning came, the sea had taken her gently, her chains slack against the sand, seaweed tangled in her hair. At sunrise, fishermen returned to the harbor and found the sea utterly still. Not a ripple, not a wind. They said the woman had sung the storm to sleep. In the frozen keep of Casimir's, near Krakow, 1511, a heretic scholar awaited confession. His hands bore ink stains that no washing could remove, as though the words themselves had sunk into his flesh. They said he'd written of stars as divine wheels turned by invisible hands, and that such talk was reckless, for wheels belonged to fate, not heaven. The rack stood ready in the corner, its cogs oiled and silent. He studied it as one might study a clock, curious but not afraid. "You misunderstand me," he told the inquisitor. "I only wanted to see what God looks like when he moves." They tightened the ropes once. Tendons strained, joints cracked. Yet he did not scream. Instead, he whispered a single phrase in Latin, faint but steady, a poor sea movement. The clerk shrugged, mishearing it as nonsense, and marked him as compliant. Later, scribes chiselled the phrase on the cell wall, claiming it meant, and still it turns. Along the Italian coast, near Genoa, a plague ship drifted unmanned into port in 1349. Its sails hung in tatters, its hull creaking against the dock like a beast exhaling. The guards who climbed aboard found no living soul, only the faint chirp of rats in the hold. And to bodies in the captain's cabin, a man and a woman, clasped together, eyes open to the same window through which the sunlight fell. Nobody knew who they were. A local monk performed their rites upon the harbor shore, reading softly while the townsfolk kept their distance. He wrote afterward in the abbey log, "They went in peace, and we, in fear." The harbor master ordered the ship burned, flames took mast and memory alike. 4 years after, sailors approaching the coast swore they saw a faint light moving along the cliffs on foggy nights. A lantern swaying where no wind should blow. And in faraway Hungary, a century later, fog rolled along the Danube so thick it swallowed even the lamps upon the bridge. There, a narrow wooden trestle led to the gallows hill. They called it the threshold of mercy. A thief, just a boy, stood waiting, rope looped loose around his neck. His crime was stealing a loaf of bread from the cathedral kitchen. It was winter. The wheat had failed. You could hear his stomach even as he stood silent. The priest held a book, the hangman a stool, the magistrate a sealed order. They waited for the bell that would signal the hour. It did not ring. Instead, fog smothered the city into a quiet so absolute that time itself seemed to hesitate. The magistrate, frowning, signed the pardon anyway. "No sound can mean no sanction," he muttered, sealing the paper. When morning came, the fog lifted to bright gold light. The bell tower stood intact, its rope cut clean through. No axe marks, no blade, just a single white feather tangled in the frayed end. And further west, in London, 1601, the Old Bailey heard its final death by boiling. No one came to witness. The citizens were tired of spectacle. The condemned was a cook who'd poisoned meat destined for a noble's table. They filled the cauldron, lit the fire, and waited for water to ripple. He stepped forward without protest, muttering only that meat spoils fastest in summer. Steam rose, wrapping him in mist. By the time the first bubbles reached the surface, there was no sound, only the faint popping of water. When it ended, the sheriffs poured the broth into the drains that ran under Newgate. And that evening, those who walked near the river said the air itself smelled faintly of rosemary, as if even boiling water had learned to cleanse what men could not. Centuries passed. The instruments grew quieter, fewer wheels, fewer ropes. But cruelty never needed tools. It only needed patience, belief, and silence. Somewhere, in an English cloister round 1700, an old executioner laid down his axe and refused to swing again. When asked why, he simply said, "I've grown accustomed to prayer, not screaming." He became a gardener after that, tending roses in the abbey yard. And one by one, the roses climbed the walls where once blood had splashed stone. The monks who came after called them the mercy blooms. Visitors still see them, pale, soft, scentless, growing quietly through centuries of rain. The world turns slower now. The iron rusts, the wood rots, the ropes moulder away under ivy. Yet if you walk through certain European fields on a fog-heavy morning, sometimes you'll find stones arranged in impossible circles, or mounds where no graves are marked. If you press an ear to the ground, you may hear it, faint, rhythmic, not the screams of the damned, but the slow beat of rain soothing the earth that once bore them. And in that sound, there is no terror, only rest. The torches have burned down to coals. The air smells faintly of lime, smoke, and rain-washed moss. The church bells toll again, one last time, so distant, they sound more like memory than sound. Close your eyes now. The past has nothing more to say, just mist, stone, quiet, and the slow breath of history. Sleep, traveler, dark as this road has been. It has an ending, and the ending, always, is peace. The candle's flame trembles lower one soft breath, one silent flicker, and that tiny sun bends toward the wick. Outside, snow thickens. The city sleeps. Iron gates groan in their hinges under wind. Ravens huddle beneath eaves. And the rivers move under a skin of ice, whispering like something far older than time. Our wander through the centuries continues once more, quieter now, each step muffled by snow and distance. All that remains are fragments, the toll of bells, the smell of wood smoke, the slow closing of the age of cruelty, and yet its heartbeat lingers, faint but steady, echoing from the corners of history's darker rooms. In Bruges, 1544, candlelight fluttered in the Guildhall windows as an old executioner polished what he swore would be his final wheel. Rain drummed steady on the roof-thick spring rain that made the cobbles weep. No crowd had gathered. The condemned, a mason who had struck his overseer dead, was laid down with the weary calm of a man who had worked too long to fear rest. The wheel turned once slow, gentle. A kneecap gave way, a sigh escaped. The executioner stopped, knelt beside him, and asked, "Do you forgive me?" The condemned nodded. No priest came, only thunder rolled. The wheel was kept in the hall for decades after, no longer used. Its rim hung with ivy. When the building was converted into a wine store, workers found coins pressed between its spokes, flakes of silver blackened with age. Mercy's small offerings, left by unseen hands. 3 centuries later, in the raffish port of La Rochelle, walls of fog swallowed the sea, lanterns hissed in the rain. And inside a narrow alley tavern stood the KG the water box. Here the condemned were not displayed, but submerged, a wooden chest lowered into harbor tide. With a breathing slit left open, the salt smell mixed with rope, tar, and old ale. The guards, half drunk on rum, sang hymns between shanties to keep their fear away. When the chest rose again at dawn, it dripped with barnacles. No sound came from within, only the sigh of water retreating down the planks. The harbor rats lapped the puddle's edge like holy water. The soldiers crossed themselves and went for breakfast. Southwood, in Florence, 1518. The angels painted on fresco ceilings looked down on a physician accused of unnatural vivisections. They said he cut open the bodies of beggars for knowledge, claiming it was God's curiosity that guided his blade. He was sentenced not to die, but to observe himself placed before a mirror. bound so he could not look away as the hangman drew the rope. Those who watched said that before his vision failed, he whispered not mercy, but fascination. When they unbound him, his eyes were glass clear, reflecting the heavens painted above the hall. The pupils had dilated to swallow the light. The inquisitors ordered the mirror shattered. The pieces were used later to decorate a chapel wall. Nobody noticed that on certain mornings, when the sun struck the shards, brief reflections of faces unknown flashed across the marble like ghosts. In the Netherlands, 1625, the city of Utrecht was struck by an executioner's strike. Tired of blood, 30 hangmen refused to serve. They locked the gallows yard and left the keys with a priest, who simply placed them on the altar and walked away. The city panicked at first. Justice stood still a week. But no crime rose. No riots came. For days. No executions. No tortures. Just the quiet hum of bakeries, markets, and carts. When the magistrates finally brought new men from another province, the people stood watching and did not cheer. The hangmen did their work. Then they too laid down the ropes, left the yard, and followed the others into quiet plains. The gallows rotted, flowers climbing its frame. Bees nested there. When wind blew across its frame years later, the air hummed faintly like a psalm with no words. In Iceland, under the northern aurora of 1680, the execution was almost beautiful. The prisoner, a poet who had cursed the crown in verse, was condemned to exile on the Glacier Vatnajökull. They led him out in silver fog, the horizon boundless white. His only companions, a torch, a loaf, and a small bell tethered to his wrist, meant to ring if he stumbled too close to crevasse. He walked into emptiness and did not ring. Weeks later, travelers found the bell frozen mid-swing, locked in drifting snow. They buried it there, and the wind, rushing over ice cliffs, sometimes strikes the place just right, producing a thin, chiming note that sounds like memory itself. In the monastery of Seville, 1553, the monks practiced silence as penance, for silence, they believed, was a slower agony than flame. Each brother who had sinned lay face down upon the cloister floor, fasting beneath a bowl of burning incense, its fumes rising sweet and suffocating. One novice dozed between breaths. When they woke him hours later, he was smiling faintly, the smoke curling through his hair like a saint's halo. They buried him under the fig tree in the garden, and the next year that tree bore fruit sweeter than any before. The abbot marked the spot with only 2 words, dormivit bene. He slept well. And in London, just before dawn, 1666, a firebird spread its wings across the Thames. The city burned. Torture chambers, gibbets, prisons all became equal in the ash. Flames, indifferent, purified every chain and beam. When dawn brought smouldering ruin, the surviving warders of Newgate found the Iron Maiden caved inward, her spikes dulled. The air inside scented not of iron, but cedar, a piece of some distant cupboard burned nearby, mingling mercy with wood smoke. One garter boy who had never seen the wheel turn carved a small cross into the cooling stone, and whispered, no more. He became a carpenter, carving church pews from what had once been gallows beams. For a long moment, the centuries grow quiet. The fog fades. The wind relents. All that lingers are scents the blood-turned rust, the tallow long burned. The ash of unknown fires carried faintly on sleep's breeze. Out beyond memory they rest, the suffering and their keepers alike. Not damned, not sainted, just gone. The clock strikes again its chime deep, soft, patient. The candle on your bedside breathes its last, folding into its puddle of wax. The darkness that follows is clean, not frightening, not mournful, just infinitely still. The kind of silence where even pain forgets itself. You've walked the whole road now through wheel and water. Flame and frost and come out the other side, intact. The world outside is different tonight. Softer, kinder, perhaps because history, for all its cruelty, taught one lesson worth keeping. That nothing, however dark, is forever. Close your eyes. The bells fade. The smoke clears. Rain whispers against distant. Stony the past exhales, and finally lets you sleep.